Hey, Langley, welcome to Shaboom.
Rick, thanks for having me. It's an honor. I'm so glad to be here.
Well, in your intro, I talked about you being raised on a farm in eastern North Carolina. Talk a little bit about that and how that kind of impacted your life.
Yeah, I'd be glad to. It was such a great upbringing. I grew up in farm country in eastern North Carolina, really close to the coast. And so, up until about the age of 8, my father had a farm. He raised corn and soybeans, and I remember being out on the tractor. I remember following behind the tractor, just kind of looking at everything that they got turned over in the soil. And then, when I was about 9, my father actually bought a commercial shrimp boat, and we moved to the little town of Belhaven. And I was a striker and a deckhand for about 6 years. And I mean, if you really wanted to love the natural world, grow up on a farm and work on a shrimp boat. It was a great way to learn how to work hard, and it was very formative. I still think of those times very fondly.
Well, I love that part of the state. I mean, a lot of people don't realize how beautiful that part of North Carolina is with all the estuaries and tributaries
Yeah.
and the lowland for farming and all that kind of stuff. So you went to the state university, you go to Chapel Hill. What made you want to go to North Carolina?
Well, there was a legacy in my family. My mom and dad both went to UNC. That's where they met. My grandfather went to school there. I was a big basketball fan, so I wanted to be at UNC and see what it was all about. And while I was there, Dean Smith won his first championship in 1982 when Michael Jordan hit that very, very famous shot.
I was in the Superdome for that shot and had a perfect view. I was sitting
Were you?
downstairs. Oh, yeah. I was a
Wow.
member of the National Association of Basketball Coaches. We held our convention every year. This was my second Final Four. My first one was the year before when North Carolina lost in the championship game to
Yeah,
Indiana,
I remember.
Al Wood's senior year. And then I was there to watch this great championship. So I grew up Larry Miller, Rusty Clark era North Carolina fan. I had a weekly reader, I remember, in school that talked about them. And so I
Yeah.
grew up as a Dean Smith fan and loved the Hills and continue to have pulled for North Carolina over the years. So did you major in finance? Was
Made,
that
yeah, I majored in economics, and I was always interested in how the economy worked, how people on a personal level made their decisions, and how corporations and really governments made their decisions.
what made you want to be a financial analyst, advisor?
Yeah, so um, I I became interested in becoming a financial advisor when I was in the Air Force. I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do when I got out of the Air Force, and so I saved quite a bit of money to go back to UNC and get an MBA degree, and I had 3 or 4 different informational interviews. And what drew me towards becoming a financial advisor was that I always liked money. I always liked understanding how money worked. I always liked the idea of having my money working for me. You know, my father drilled into me the importance of saving, and so and you know we didn't have a lot growing up, and so I wanted to be in a situation where I could afford the things that I wanted. So I always liked money. I always liked investing and saving money, and I also have always enjoyed people. And when you're a financial advisor, you think people think that you're in the money business, but you are in the people business. Just like you, like in so many businesses, you think you're in PR or you think you're in marketing, but you're in the people business. And being a financial advisor is no different. You're in the people business, and what you're offering is the wisdom and insight that you gain over many years of doing this job in good markets and in bad markets.
What are some of the fundamentals that you try to impress upon your clients in terms of the principles of investing, saving, keeping money, growing wealth? What are some of the basics that you start with?
Well, the very sort of bedrock for all the work that we do is to have a financial plan. We call our plan financial goal analysis, and our planning tool is a very good tool. We use it for everyone, and we start, as Stephen Covey famously said in The 7 Habits, of highly effective people. Begin with the end in mind. And so we tried to do that. And for us, beginning with the end in mind entails understanding what a person's goals are. And, goals they can sound like this. I want to retire when I'm 65, and I think we're going to need $200,000 a year after taxes to live on. And then there will be other ancillary goals. I want to buy a boat. We want to sell the place in Charleston and buy a place in the mountains of North Carolina. And so we take into account the ongoing goals plus the one-off goals. And, we memorialize those on paper. And then the next thing we do is we try to understand what kind of risk tolerance a client has. And remember, risk means different things to different people. One of the best definitions of risk I've ever heard is not having enough money and having to live with those consequences. That's a kind of a risk. And you also have to remember that risk is risky, and risk happens fast. You think everything's great, and all of a sudden, something funny happens in Europe or in Asia, and all of a sudden markets sell off, and you're dealing with the emotional baggage from that. So we try to understand a person's risk tolerance, and we try to understand where all of their different sources of income are. So Social Security, maybe a person has a pension, maybe a person has rental income, and then we'll run the numbers and see what the outcome looks like in terms of their percentage chances are of reaching their goals. But then at some point, you turn the computer off and you use your common sense, because software and modeling can only get you so far. You turn the computer off and you have a conversation and say, look, it looks like there are deficits here. Have you thought about this? What if you worked 2 years longer? What if you saved a little bit more money? And in some instances, the plan looks terrific, and we'll suggest, hey, what if you could retire a couple of years earlier if you'd like. So the most important piece of doing what I do is in the financial planning and the financial goal analysis. And once you've got that figured out, then the rest becomes a lot easier in terms of picking the right kinds of investment vehicles to get the client to reach those goals.
I'm amazed in kind of doing some informal surveys with friends and colleagues how few people have a financial plan.
Yeah.
And so you're going to get what you deserve
Right.
if you have no plan.
Right.
And I think for baby boomers now, it's essential to have a plan. I know a lot of people that don't have a will.
Yeah, isn't that astonishing? The government has a
Yeah.
will for you. I don't think you want the government will. And so, I can name several people right now that I know that don't have a will, or their will is outdated, and they're basically walking around naked, without a will. Intestate, I guess, is the word the attorneys use. So you've got to have a will. That's the most basic thing. And then there are some other components of estate planning that you need to make sure are tied up appropriately as well. But if your listeners are looking themselves in the mirror and say they're talking about me, we don't have a will, then I suggest strongly that they go talk to an estate planning attorney that they trust as soon as they possibly can, because nothing happens and then something happens, and you needed to have that document.
Well, if you don't have one, I want to remind everybody listening, the government's going to get your money. And
Exactly.
I don't think any of us planned on working and saving and sacrificing to maybe give the money to the federal government. You've been at this for a while. Can you believe where you started, what the value of the stock market was then and where it is today?
Well, it's funny you should mention that, because just this morning I had to sharpen up my memory on Einstein's quote. Do you remember Einstein's quote about compounding? At least
No, I don't know
it's
that one.
it's attributed to him. There's some question as to whether he really said it, but he said compounding is the eighth wonder of the world. And so you think that it's high now. Well, in 10 years, if we get just 7% a year in the Dow or the S&P, it'll be twice as high as it is now. Isn't that something? And that's just
Yeah.
really because of the nature of compounding. But then step back a second and think to yourself, why do stocks go up? What makes stocks go up? On average, on any given day, stocks have a 54% chance of going up and a 46% chance of going down. So the house odds are in your favor, to use lingo that Vegas would use, and I'm sure investment pros would frown on. But what makes stocks go up? It's stocks go up because people who work at these public companies, they want to improve their lot in life. They want to make more money. They want to have more money for their families, to take good vacations, to do fun things. And so they are in it with you. They're in it to win it with you to help their companies make more money. And stock prices go up because profits are going up. And if profits go up and up and up, the stock price should follow. But if companies have poor management, then eventually profits go down and the stock price will follow. And so that's why stocks go up, because these companies, it's not a stock market, it's a market of stocks. And each individual stock represents a company. And the management of these companies want to improve their own lot in life, and your situation improves with it because you're a shareholder.
I remember '08, '09, '10
Oh,
so
yeah.
vividly
Yeah,
when
me too.
it looked like our entire financial system was going to collapse, um, and yet it didn't. I knew a lot of people that took money out of the market and regretted it because the market came back so strong. Interesting, in my business during that period, uh, everybody was cutting back
Yeah.
because they worried about, big brand spending and marketing. And I'm a contrarian. I went the other direction. In '08, I decided to double our non-billable travel budget.
Nice.
And and what I found in '08 was I got more meetings because nobody else was calling on people. People had
Right.
cut back.
Right.
And so suddenly people were like, yeah, I'll have coffee with you, or yeah, I'll
Smart.
have breakfast or lunch or drinks. And it was so successful in a really bad financial year that we did really well in '08. I doubled it again in '09. We did even
Nice.
better. I
Yeah.
doubled it again in '10, and we did even better. And I think about, had you invested, had you gone the other direction in '08, '09, and '10, the returns you would have right now.
Well, that's a great point. And that your comment harkens back to my notion that every business is a people business, whether you're a financial advisor or if you're in the professional marketing services business that you're in. Go see the people, right? Talk to the people, find out what they want, and help them get through a hard time. Because when you were going out to see your clients, I bet you were talking with them about how you could potentially help them get through a hard time with the economy like it was, right? And so, to your point about people selling out when the market really hits the skids, that's very common, and it's the whole idea of trying to time the market. And Rick, I am telling you right now that not one single soul can time the market. Not one. Even Warren Buffett has made mistakes, as smart as he is. No one can time the market. And think about it. If you're going to time the market, then you've got to know when to get in and when to get out, and then when to get in and when to get out. And so you've got to make two right decisions in a row forever and ever. And not one soul that I know of can do that.
Yeah,
So,
if I always said if I could predict the future, I would just go to the horse track once a year. I,
yeah,
I,
right,
I mean, it's easy. I can pick the trifecta. I already know who's going to win. This would be
right.
easy. It doesn't work that way.
Well, I want to give you one more point. So you've probably heard of the VIX, which some people call the fear index. So you can look it up. The VIX has a ticker symbol, and it's trading around 24, 25 now. And what an elevated VIX means is it signals that investors are very worried about the stock market and the direction of the stock market. It's a complicated formula to get to the VIX, but it's calculated and shown every day, moment by moment. And what we've seen is when we have an elevated fear index, 30 or 40, that in many instances, people want to sell out during those periods of time. But if you go back and take a look at what has happened, if you put money into investments when the VIX was at a very elevated 40, historically, equities are typically up around 33% on average in the 12 months after the VIX or the fear index is so heightened, because what that means is that the market has sold off. And that's typically a good entry point, not a good exit point.
You know, I would think, the fact that you can't predict the future, none of us can. You do have a plan, you do have principles, but I would think the number one ingredient that I would look for in a financial advisor, and I think others would, is trust.
Yeah,
And that's, you trust people because you have a relationship with them. And it goes back to you saying, I'm really in the people business
sure.
and I'm trying to impress upon people that you can trust me to give you the right advice. Ultimately, the investor, the saver is going to make the final decision, but you like to have as much information as you can
Right.
for making that decision. Talk about trust and how important that is.
Yeah, that's a great point. If people, for some reason, get the whiff of the notion that you're not trustworthy, it's game over, and they can see it. They can really see it coming a mile away. And so I think trust comes from a couple things: competence and confidence. And so, I've been doing this quite a long time now, 30 years, and I have been through some incredibly rocky markets. The dot-com bubble bursting was the first really rocky situation that I personally went through, and that was a mess. And then the financial crisis in 2008, and that one just about took all of us out. That was so stressful. That was an incredible, hopefully once in a career kind of a situation. It was terrible. And then the COVID crash, which happened so fast that if you believe what the pundits say, it was the fastest crash we ever had. And then a recovery. And so, what an advisor learns through those periods of time is invaluable for the client, because you've learned the things to do and the things that you should not do, and I think those concepts and that experience comes through in the conversation with a client, with an investor, and inspires trust in an investor, because the advisor's been around the block. We've seen this movie and we know what happens. Do you think the market will come back? Well, it always has. And then the other piece is communication. What I tell the team is, communication is key. Communication is key. So, Rick, we don't wait for the clients to call us when the market is getting hit. We call the clients on a regular basis to keep them apprised of what's happening before they ever get a chance to call us. And I think people appreciate that, and I think that creates trust in the client. And then finally, what occurs to me is, in building trust with our clients, you can never forget that these are the people that we work with. They're human beings just like us, and they want someone to be there for them when it hits the fan. And we do our best to show up every day and do that. And I hope that builds trust. I think it does.
Well, it's interesting where I sit today as a 71-year-old baby boomer. A lot of my peers have retired. And
Yeah.
so now, they're not creating any more income. They're living off of whatever investments,
Right.
retirement, pensions, Social Security that they have. But some of us are continuing to work. This generation is not retiring like previous generations.
Right.
Maybe because we want more things,
Right.
but also I think we like to work, and
Right.
we tend to be have a little more vigor, as John Kennedy used to say. Vigor, and are still trying to be productive. What would be your advice to this generation that's listening today about their needs and what they need to be doing?
Well, that's a great question. I had a chance to give a presentation last week, and I tried to boil it all down to bite-sized chunks, and I think one of the most important nuggets, and maybe this sounds silly and it's super duper simple, which is save money. Save money. Pay yourself first. And one of the ways that looks like and you're asking for the next generation. One way that looks like is to make sure you've got a rainy day fund set aside, of course, but then also to max out your 401k if you possibly can. And if you can't max it out, because I realize that some younger people starting out, they don't have all the discretionary income in the world, so maybe they don't want to max out their 401k and put the max in it. But they ought to at least figure out what the company match is. So figure out the company match within their 401k and at least contribute that, because when the company matches your contribution, that is what we call free money. And I like free money, and I know that you do too. Another item is the Roth IRA. And so the Roth IRA is a tremendous way to save money for retirement.
Well, we've talked about this generation. We will have the largest wealth transfer in the history of the world,
Sure.
in a combination of assets and real estate. And so it's interesting for boomers that have resources to begin to think in terms of maybe some of the places, in addition to their family, where they may want the money to go. I heard a really fun story the other day that Andrew Carnegie, the great steel magnate, gave so much money away and built so many libraries and academic institutions and lots of stuff. And there was a very funny story where somebody came to him and said, "Could you fund this?" And he said, "I'll tell you what, if you could find, I'll pay half if you can find somebody to pay the other half." And a week later, the person showed up and said, I have good news. I found the other person to pay the other half. And Andrew Carnegie said, "That's great. Who was it?" And he said, "Mrs. Carnegie."
That's a great story.
So I found that to be interesting. But, as you're looking for, like you said, executing your game plan of how much money do I need to live, how much money do I need for the extra things I want, and then the other resources I have, how can they continue to accumulate value that can be passed on to another generation? One of, not concerns, but one of my goals is that my two children are astute with the money that they're going to be left.
Sure.
Because it's got to last them for a long time, and I hope it becomes an nest egg that can build for their children,
Right.
Long term. So talk a little bit about that.
Well, that's a great point. We're seeing a couple of trends right now that are very important in our world as financial advisors. One is helping the next generation. And then secondly is philanthropy. We're seeing a lot of people become more and more interested in philanthropy. And so in terms of helping the next generation, your children, your grandchildren, one of the most important things is to make sure that your estate plan is set up properly. And another little tidbit, and this is a good place to insert this, is to take a look at your beneficiaries on your IRA and any retirement plan that you have, especially if your life situation has changed. Things change in life, and you want to make sure that the beneficiaries that you set up, say 20 years ago or 30 years ago when you set up your IRA, are still the beneficiaries, the correct beneficiaries for you now. And let's suppose for a second you had another child, and you need to add a third primary beneficiary, or you're naming contingent beneficiaries, and those are your grandchildren. Make sure you've got all the people named that you want to receive those funds, right? And I would say for the next gen, after you've got your estate plan squared away, it's really never too early to begin the education process for younger people, 25-year-olds, 30-year-olds. We can develop a plan for them as well. And the best part about that is they have a long-term time horizon to be able to make mid-course correct, midlife course corrections if need be, because they do have time. And if the plan's not working, we can advise them earlier that they need to save more money, or that maybe they need to plan to work a couple of extra years. And so it's the planning process for the next gen in two ways: a plain old financial plan. What are your goals? How much can you save? And then making sure that the parents or the grandparents' trust and estate are set up properly to include the will and any trust that you might set in place to take care of your heirs as well.
Last financial question. You advised me late last year, you know, get ready. It's going to be an interesting year. I referred to this year as a theme park with a big old roller coaster,
Yeah.
and the volatility as Trump 2.0 is in the marketplace, and we have tariff issues, and it seems like the market goes up, the market goes down, the market goes up, the market goes down. What are you telling your clients in this year of volatility?
Well, that is a great question. And so you're right. At the late last year to the beginning of this year, we knew with the new administration coming in, there was the potential for quite a lot of volatility. And so the there's another great quote that I would use that I think is apropos here, and is by the great General and President Dwight D. Eisenhower. And he said, planning is everything. Plans are worthless. Planning, thinking about it, is everything. And so I heard it put another way is that, plans are everything before the shooting starts, and they're worthless after the shooting starts, because no plan survives contact with the enemy, right? And so what we had going for us.
Mike Tyson said it even better. He said, everybody has a plan till they get hit in the mouth.
Exactly. And so, look, we got punched in the mouth, right? And last month with what was happening with certain public policy items that start with a T, tariff, right? And so the key is to have a plan in place before the shooting starts. And that's part of that is to understand what a client's risk tolerance is. And so it's funny, you might think that an old couple might be super risk averse, and that a younger person might be super risk taking, but it's not always that way. Every person is different. Every client, and especially every couple, have their own particular risk tolerance. But what we try to do before the shooting starts is we try to make sure that each client has the proper asset allocation. Asset allocation is a jargon term we use in our business. We love jargon, but it basically means which eggs do you have in which basket, right? Stocks, bonds, cash, real estate, your equity in your business. And so we want to make sure that we understand how much risk a client is willing to take before the shooting starts, get the accounts set up that way before anything ever really starts to jostle the markets. And then when we do have volatility like we had last month, the plan is ready for it. And part of that whole asset allocation process, which eggs we have in which baskets, part of that is diversification. And I'm sure I've told you this in the past, that it has been said that diversification is the only free lunch in investing. And so this year, diversification has worked. Large company equities, especially growth equities, they've gotten hit, right? But bonds are up. International stocks have been up. Money markets up. That kind of diversification has really helped this year. It's helped people preserve capital. And remember, preservation of capital is probably the most important thing. I know that a retired person doesn't want to go back to work just because the markets are down. And so preservation of capital is very, very important. And remember, sometimes you win by not losing. And that's why we diversify and have a good mix before everything starts to really rock and roll.
Yeah. Well, before I let you go, I want to turn to another subject. You're a singer-songwriter, and a good one. What got you into that?
Well, you're so nice to ask, Rick. I appreciate you listening to my music. I've always been what I would call a word guy. I love reading. I love how lyricists are able to put together words and melodies that make you feel something, that make you feel sad, that make you feel happy. And so I started taking guitar lessons 10 years ago at a pretty ripe old age. And it got so good to me, I just followed it through all the way to the natural conclusion. And I've got music out on Spotify under my name, Langley Respess. And I would call it sort of folk country, sort of folk country. And, I hope people listen to it and enjoy it. I've really enjoyed the process. It's meant a lot to me to write music and to have people listen to the music. And I love it. And I hope other people enjoy it.
Well, I think this is a good way to finally connect all the dots. You invest and you save by having a plan and working your plan, but ultimately you do it for the things you love. You do it to be able to be a singer-songwriter or to be a traveler or to own a Major League Baseball team, maybe.
Right.
You do it for all those reasons. Listen, I can't thank you enough for being with us today and sharing your wisdom here on Shmoo.
Thank you so much for having me, Rick. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.